Hello, welcome back to another episode of Somewhere Between a Film and TV podcast. I am your host, Daniel Parra, and number one, thank you so much for listening and watching. Number two, if you could, please like, comment, and subscribe down below. And gotta ask you one question before we start with the film Ne Zha 2. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you somewhere between on it? I want to know. I am so excited to talk about this movie. Go ahead and comment down below what you thought. You're about to hear a whole lot of thoughts from me. But before we really get into it, I want to talk about the first one. The first Ne Zha, and I did look up how to pronounce it. I said last week I would. I watched the first one. I thought it was very good. I thought that it was very interesting just in terms of lore and world building, and also the central character. The central character for me kind of reminded me of, this is an anime I love, and I know Chinese culture, Japanese culture, two separate things, but this world, both of them did remind me of anime in some aspects, and this reminded me a whole lot of Black Clover, specifically with Ne Zha's character kind of reminding me of the Asta character, and of his counterpart with the soul spirit orb, the character, I'm completely blanking on the name right now, even though they say it a whole lot, but his equivalent of it, you know. And that's sort of the catalyst going into the second one, were the events of the first one. But overall, I thought that movie was very good. I thought that the first half wasn't rocky, it's just that it's kind of not aimless, but it felt a little inconsequential just in terms of some of the sort of slapsticky aspects of it. But then you realize what it's doing. It takes a pivot in the second half, and I do think that the nature of the storytelling here, that's intentional, because the second one does something kind of similar in a different way. But overall, yes, the first one I thought was very good, and it was funny. I remember that with that movie, I had been looking forward to it for a really long time, but I don't really quite remember how big the release was. But a close friend of mine that I was living with at the time, we were roommates, was excited for it as well. He'd even sent me the trailer for the first one. I was like, this looks super cool. What is this? And it was showing, I believe it was the moment where he's playing they say it a lot, the game where he can kick the thing really hard and it sends his parents into the wall. And overall, I thought it was really, really good. However, going into this one, I'd heard so much about it. This is the number one animated movie of all time. This movie's made over $2 billion. I've heard the scope, the scale, that it's just crazy, that it's this massive accomplishment. So going into it, of course, you start to develop the thing that we call expectations. And it gets to a point, right, where you're kind of like, okay, can anything match the expectations that I have now, that I've heard about this movie? That I want to shout out a specific follower at the end of this that even recommended it to me and posted this on our Instagram, Somewhere Between Film, and then Somewhere Between Pod on TikTok, if you want to follow both of those, that were like, what did you think of it? What did you think of it? I want to know. When that's the first time I've ever gotten specific requests on something, so that's how I know that this movie's kind of a big deal. So answering the question, did I love it? Did I hate it? Or am I somewhere between on it? This movie floored me in every single aspect, every expectation, every single thing that I possibly had heard about it going in. It is a completely triumphs over every single expectation you could have possibly had. It's a wonderful movie. It's incredibly well animated. It is a step up from the first one in every single kind of way, and that's a movie that I like a fair amount. And it's funny, it's emotional, and overall the action scenes themselves are wonderful pieces of work that go on for a really long time, and that's not a complaint at all. So really getting into the specifics here, what I loved about this before we do, let's go ahead and talk about what this movie's about. And it's a little bit difficult for me because I'm not well immersed in Chinese culture, but I do have the description here. A rebellious young boy, Ne Zha, is feared by the gods and born to mortal parents with wild, uncontrolled powers. Now that he's faced with an ancient force intent on destroying humanity, he must grow up to become the hero the world needs. However, this kind of sounds like the first one, but this is the description for the second one as well. But actually describing the plot, I feel that At the end of the first one, both him and his only friend and best friend are sort of separated from the bodies themselves, and there's this big spoilers, by the way, for everything. Spoilers from here on out on this movie because there's a lot I want to talk about. And he is attempting to get the character's body back throughout the end of it. So it's this sort of training montage type movie, not just montage, but the whole middle act of it as well, where it reminded me a lot of training arcs again in anime, and also the overall kind of pacing of a season of a show. Really, it felt a lot like how certain, because I'm going to bring up the anime that it reminded me of a whole lot of outside of Black Clover, but it reminded me a lot of Dragon Ball Z as well, just in terms of the overall aspect of the transformations and stuff as well, whenever they kind of, how do you describe it? Transform, level up, all of those things. Ao Bing, by the way, I was distracted because I was trying to do that, but he's trying to get the soul back for his friend, Ao Bing. And so the movie sort of launches itself into this catalyst of events because the antagonist of the first one is one of the primary highlights of this movie for me, and I want to get into why, because I thought it was a really well done play on typical 3-act structure blockbusters. What I really want to mention about this movie is the universal language of just blockbusters, generally speaking. They do follow a 1-act, a 2-act, and a 3-act thing, but in this one, what I like in regards to animated films, this treats it far more as a medium than it does as, oh, this is a movie for kids. I think that this particular animated movie goes to some places I don't think a US animated film has ever done. There have been some PG-13 US animated films. I mean, yes, there's also South Park and stuff like that, but I mean in terms of a movie that would not be rated R, but PG-13, it goes to some really dark places, and it really pushes some certain boundaries that I thought were really interesting, just in terms of the overall scope and scale of what the events mean. And I'll get into what I'm talking about in a second, because it even affects some characters that were sort of used as a highlight in a way in the first one. But genuinely, the antagonist of the first one, what I liked so much about this was that there was this real will to not just show the characters in a one-dimensional light. A lot of them have multi-dimensional issues with them, and or positives. It goes back and forth, and I like that these characters are genuinely willing to speak to each other and hear each other out on their moral positionings and why they do what they do. And they also they do have specific antagonists. I'll get into who it is in this one because it's like a surprise twist one. But the one from the first, that is I believe it was a cheetah or a leopard, Shen Gong Bao is his name. And what I like so much about him was he ends up getting more development in this one, because you realize that his brother sort of looks up to him in a kind of way, and it affects the entire middle and third portion of the movie, because the movie's telling us something that we're piecing together based off of our prior knowledge, and then it's a twist towards the end. But let's really get into the specifics of what I like so much about this, just because I know I'm a little bit all over the place right now, but this movie's phenomenal, and I just want to talk about it, just get my thoughts out there, because it's a brilliant piece of work. It is phenomenal just as art goes. And what I like so much, let's get into the animation, technical aspects of this movie. The animation is jaw-dropping. We're so familiar, and maybe let's say even the word comfortable, with the Pixar and 3D Disney animated style now. And that's fine, that's okay. I mean, they're great, they're pleasing to look at, they're beautiful. We talked about Elio a while back, loved that movie. And we're also starting to develop a kind of familiarity to the Spider-Verse animation as well. I will never complain about it. I think it looks wonderful. I love it. I love the hyper-stylized, every other frame type animated look. K-pop Demon Hunters, which I'm planning on reviewing at some point soon. I loved. That movie Goat looks really cool. But we're starting to do... Oh, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was awesome as well. We're starting to develop a kind of cohesion to the US looks of things. What was once groundbreaking is now becoming the norm. So now, a movie from China, the animation, the first one, I thought was really good. But here, the layering, the texture, the water alone, everything in the movie itself is beautiful. It's gorgeous. It opens on, even the depth of field is expanded. It opens on them trying to put together the clay for their bodies again, and I thought it looked just wonderful in the first couple minutes alone. There's this sort of detail towards the ground and this sounds so gross to say, but even their mucus, like, because there's one joke that they tell, has a lot of detail put into it. And there's something to be said about that, because then the sort of elasticity of the characters, the way they move, the way they fight, I want the animation style to extend into one of my other biggest things I want to talk about that we can segue into right now. The action. The action is propelled by just how fluid the way the film looks and how gorgeous it all is. I think that there's something so satisfying about the hits here whenever they hit each other. I'm a huge martial arts fan. I used to do it before tore my ACL, so I love the way that specific type of fighting style looks, and there's just a genuine fluidity to the way the camera will move and the way the characters will move, and you'll hear the hit and then it'll go so fast, and then these characters have all these sort of different abilities. It's why I think that I love that they introduced so many new characters into this one, is because of how their different powers work with each other. I think that Ne Zha's like the whole fire thing, and he turns into what looks like Gear 5 Luffy, but red, and Gear 4 kind of. The hair's really similar to that as well, but it looks a lot like that, but in the red fiery way. And then Ao Bing's character is water based, and there's this entire correlation of this yin yang back and forth thing that I think is really, really well done. But tying into that, I think that when the movie, it starts off really great, but in terms of the action, where it really kicks off for me, I am big on tournament arcs in anime and training arcs and things too. Love it. We'll always love it. We'll always think it's super cool. Whenever they're initially going through the levels to try and earn the elixir of immortality, the very first level with the, I think it's badgers or gophers, but either way, it's like this herd of them, and they're trying to make this soup, and you're sort of like, what is this world? What's going on? But I like that it's never really fully explained. We are just kind of thrown into, this exists. The animals can also talk as well. We don't really know why, but they can, and that's cool. But it's this specific way in which the fight is set up. I love this lean into the humor that this movie has, because it does get very serious, but it also can acknowledge its sort of zany nature and the cartoony aspects of what it has going on. And I do think that, I'm sure there's some mythological tie, which I'll get into in a second, but going into this, it's whenever he's sort of harassing them, Ne Zha is, and he's kind of saying that he's kind of goading them, right? And there's this bigger gopher, gerbil, whatever you want to call it, big rat thing, and then the other one as well, and they seem to just be this community. And one other thing in terms of the humor that it leans into is it's kind of gross sometimes. So is the first one, but this one really leans into it and also shows it in this kind of gross out way, which I was surprised by, because he pounds all this soup down, and they get mad at him because they're accusing him of stealing all of their soup, right? But then he drinks it, and then he throws it all up, and there's this sort of conflict because they don't know how to control the body of Ne Zha with Ao Bing in it as well. So he's trying to knock himself out, and then he wakes back up because it's no longer in his system. So they drink the throw up, and that's just gross. And I'm surprised that that's another thing that they kind of push to go into. Yes, gross out humor does exist in kids movies, but this is kind of to a level that really surprised me, I think. But it's just the way in which that was set up. The entire fight is very chaotic in a type of nature, but it's also really good natured, but then it's serious because the events that in which they're taking seriously. So the action still hits, it means something, and it's really well coordinated. I can't say choreographed because, this is animated, so it's not like people are doing these things, but the types of moves they're doing feel very inspired and feel very real and very cool. And this sort of hyper stylized nature of it all mixed in with the mythological aspects of the movie as well are so cool. I can't claim to know a lot about Chinese culture. I just can't. But Ne Zha, I know, is a real historical figure in the sense of mythology. And apparently a lot of these characters are. And I would love to know more about them. Like, even just them showing up within the context of the movie, me knowing nothing about them. They feel weighty. They feel like there's a real history behind these characters. Like, there's all of these things that can be said about them. Whenever they introduce new characters that you haven't seen before, I'm sure they're real because they're introduced like they have a past, like they have a history. And it's credits to the movie that I want to know what they are, but also it wasn't necessarily a fault that I didn't. It was more like the way in which they would introduce characters. It felt grandiose. It felt like when somebody would show up, they are important, and they typically were. But overall, that kind of just affects the aspect of what you think of the movie itself, just in terms of it being a grand epic, because that's really what it is. It's really grandiose in terms of scale. It is 2.5 hours long, which is crazy for an animated movie. You only feel it in the sense that everything matters. It feels like everything is headed towards something. And so I know some complaints about some other movies I've had in the past is that we're waiting for the third act for something to happen. This felt more like we are going to earn the third act, but you're going to go through a very, very entertaining first 2 acts, because what I really liked about even the small details of going all the way back to what we were talking about earlier with the negatives in terms of it being kind of inconsequential, I still loved it because it's headed somewhere. And I think even the small attention to detail with the specifics of, let's say, whenever the clay thing's happening at the beginning and they're getting mad because, they're parts of they're really unhygienic whenever they're making the clay to bring them back to life. Just the idea that their bodies are being made out of clay, that is a mythological thing that's in more than just one type of mythology, but I love it. I love that that's a thing that can be explained as just, yeah, that's how that works, because there's no real layer past that. Like, oh, why can they do that? That doesn't make any sense. Why is it that clay can create a person, all that? It's just reality here, and I love that. I really respect whenever there's a lean in towards, this is the world that we're in, this is our reality, and I think that's really cool. Where the emotion absolutely comes in is with the parents of Ne Zha in this. And I think that what makes this movie work so well for me as well is it's not all black and white. Like I said, all these characters kind of deal with kind of a moral gray area, because it is a little bit challenging, I think, for if younger people were to watch it, like let's say 8 or 9, I think that the morals discussed here would be that not everyone is as great as they let on, or something to that effect. But I do think that it's cool that it allows itself to be messier with its characters, and it allows itself to be messier in terms of who we think which characters are responsible for what, because the overall the one that was in head of the temple, the one that ends up being the main antagonist, it's the big twist. It's funny because typically that's a trope in animated movies, specifically the surprise villain, that is really, really done into the ground, if you really think about it. Incredibles 2, a movie I really like, by the way, and Frozen, and I'm trying to think of more, Zootopia, which I also really like. But there was just this thing that was this constant barrage of the surprise villain. So I don't know why here I was shocked. I was so surprised that it was him. But I think it's maybe because of the genuine stakes that are here. What's at stake? The impact. Because there is some imagery here reminiscent of massive destruction, of war, these like gigantic atrocities, and they even say that within the context of the movie. There's a family that's in the first one, the girl and the boy that kind of bullies Ne Zha, and the mother, and they die. They're shown like burned in whenever they first arrive back into their village, and I genuinely thought I those were characters from the first one, but it's genuine imagery that's shown to us while they're dying on the rooftop of the building, and it shows their burned bodies. That's crazy. That's insane that's in this movie, and I think that adding that weight of really showing that adds to the overall impact of everything happening in this movie. It's a really tricky balance because this movie can veer off into body humor slapstick territory, and then it can in the very next couple of minutes get really dark. The first one kind of did that as well, maybe to a lesser effect, but here this one, whenever it takes any kind of tonal swing, goes all out with it, and I think that's maybe why it works. But maybe that's also because in terms of US pacing, maybe that's a little bit different for us, but I can really respect it. I can really get behind the idea of kind of making something really jokey, but then just like essentially shocking imagery within the very next shot. And I noticed that it's kind of the pacing of the first one that it would do that sometimes, but here, like I said, it's to an even greater effect. But overall, I mean, even just in terms of the villains, I loved their motivation as well. Of course, some of them are the more grandiose, like I'm evil, but I have my own motivation thing going on, like the dragons, which are really cool. I love dragons. This movie's kind of tailored to a lot of my personal taste, and their designs are awesome. They're all specific looking, and they all have these unique, really cool abilities. The one that's a woman was awesome. I think she's the one that had the nails that could slice through dimension. Essentially, it was awesome and really well done, and it leads into this really grand kind of third act that I really don't even know how long it was. It felt like it went on for a really long time in the best way possible, because it starts to just be action scene after action scene after action scene, but we know why everybody's doing what they're doing. We know everyone's motivations and the place that they're in, which is really hard to do. It's hard to do not only a blockbuster of that scale, but even just make it all make sense and make all the characters have genuinely decent and really well done motivation. The one that was the main antagonist in the first one ends up being really layered, because it turns out that they were keeping hold of his father, the one that Ne Zha trains with in Trial 2 on the poles, which was another really great set piece that escalates into something that was really well done. And a lot of it really reminded me of shonen, of the Japanese anime, essentially. Like, it felt like if Dragon Ball Z, if it were a little bit more layered in terms of when villains first arrive. I know typically villains are rehabilitated in that and they end up being good, but here it's kind of like messier just in terms of moral motivation, and I think that's really well done. I do think that's also why Ne Zha makes a great protagonist, because the coding of him being a demon but also being the one that's sort of the linchpin of good, I think is really cool, because he's really brash, he's really irrational, and if you were to describe him essentially like how we would, he's kind of a badass kid, really. Like he acts up for attention. He is constantly at odds with other people. He has a short temper, but he's really likable. I really liked that character a lot, even more so than in the first one. I like him in that, but here, I think that there's just something really... Maybe it's because he reminds me of Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes, of all things, but there's a real similar vibe there in terms of the energy they both have. He's really sarcastic, but he's also really kind of self-reflective, and the moral of the first one was just that he really wanted to fit in and be liked. And here, they've obviously sort of warmed up to him a little bit, but now it's more kind of this literally not imposed, but this self-fighting conflict, because there's two people not at ends with each other, but they represent these two separate things. And it ends up making what the characters all kind of feel and shift, that they end up sort of being opposite in towards the back half of the movie. The ones that are like, coated in the kind of heavenly look are the ones that end up being the bad guys, and then the demon look with the monsters and the squid who keeps wanting to eat himself, which is a funny joke that they kind of just kept going back to, that I thought was sort of strange, but that's also what I really liked, was the pacing of this. It's really irreverent. Hear that word sometimes where people say like, oh, the humor kind of like comes out of nowhere, and it's really like sort of off kilter, but here I felt it definitively that it was. There was a joke that made me laugh so hard where it's a really serious moment, but then this shark, and I think it's the squid, but it's the shark and someone else, they start trying to outrun each other, and they end up just keep on getting hit by like lava and other things. It just veers off into like slapstick territory for like to do a Tom and Jerry bit. And then we'll cut to a really intense action scene in the sky it's like filled with all this symbolism for like the idea of heaven and hell. It's so strange, but it's really cool, and I love all that about it. But overall, I'm trying to think of really any kind of negatives I might have, but I don't really have any. I think that this movie's wonderful. I think that overall, I just genuinely, I fell in love with it. If the first half is great, the second half catapults it into just this stratosphere of being so incredible. And by the end of it, there's this stinger at the end for what they want to set up for the third one. I think that Ne Zha kind of has this like full on like Luffy Gear 5, Gear 4 hybrid form going on. And I don't know if he's going to be like that in the third one, but I will say, I hope that comes to the US so fast, so immediately. Day one, please. I'll be there, because I thought that this movie was so cool and so great. And overall, yeah, nothing negative to say for me. Go see it if you haven't. I know it's playing in IMAX here in the US. I just got to see it in a big theater, but it is so well done. It does have better voice acting than the first one. That's kind of a complaint I had, but I couldn't really throw it at the movie because I would have watched it sub. That's just kind of how I am. But the second one does have great voice acting. Like, I think that the actors all kind of step it up even more, the ones that were returning. And I loved this movie so much. I can't wait to see what they do with the third one. I think that there's some really great motivation that they give who is turning out to be a really complex character in this series. The antagonist of the first one and the sort of antagonist of the second one, because we think that he killed his parents for a significant portion of it, but he ends up being far more layered than that. And I'm annoyed that I can't get his name right now, but I mentioned him earlier, and he was so great in this. I want to see where a third one of these would go, because it's genuinely emotional. The emotions also work really well here too. One of my favorite moments is really small. It's this one where it's in the trailer, but it's wherever Ne Zha is like leaving to go to the temple, and his mom says that she wants him to give him a hug, and he says, not now. It's not like it's farewell or anything, but whenever you sort of process that, you realize he thinks his parents have died for a significant portion of this movie, that it's a thing you can piece together that he has a regret about, because he didn't think it'd be farewell. And I think that this movie is well written enough to know that that he's probably thinking about that, and I think that's really cool. Overall, though, I'm going to give this a score of a 5 out of 5. This movie was awesome. I wish that we could have gotten it here even sooner. I know that it was a February release, but then A24 picked up the distribution for it now, and now they're re-releasing it. But hey, at the end of the day, the positive is that I got to see it, and that it blew my mind, and I loved it so much, and I highly, highly recommend it. But anyway, guys, what did you think of Ne Zha 2? If you haven't seen it and you heard all of this, please go see it. It is very much well worth your time. It's unbelievably good. What's up next? I'm going to be reviewing The Studio, the Seth Rogen show. I cannot wait to talk about it. That's another show I'm super excited to talk about. But for now, again, thank you guys so much for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.